Record to the cloud. Here we go. All right.
All right. Loving the new camera setup too, by the way. Looks great.
Oh, great. We'll see how it holds out.
All right. Well, good evening, everybody. I see several faces that have been with us before, but if you are new to our series for basic photography basics from the Brentwood Photography Group, I am Jeremy Tran. I am the president of the Brentwood Photography Group. And we're really excited to have you all with us tonight, whether you're participating live right now or whether you're going to be viewing this later on through our YouTube channel that we have set up for these presentations. All of the sessions that Gale is presenting are being recorded and will be available to participants that have registered for this class and all past and future classes as well. So tonight, Gale is going to talk to us about an introduction to flower photography. I don't know if you've been outside recently, but you can't shake a stick without hitting a flower right now. So this is a really good time for us to learn about how we can take some better images of those little things that are hanging around our yards and all over the sides of the road and places. So with that, I will turn it over to Gale Stoner, who is going to do another wonderful job. So we look forward to hearing from him this evening. All right, thanks, Gale.
Okay, great. All right. Well, first of all, thank you for taking time out of your evening to participate tonight. For those of you that are live on this, and as Jeremy said, right now, if you're going to do flower photography, or if you're interested in it, this is the right time of the year to do that. What I like about flower photography is there's so many options or variables to flowers. Flower photography. I mean, you can photograph the entire flower in different angles. You can be looking, photographing literally the beauty of that particular flower. You can maybe do a macro shot of maybe a small portion of the flower. You can, again, shoot it for realism. You can photograph it to give it kind of a dream look or an artistic look. Even abstract, and that's, to me, that's the beauty of flower photography. And it's something you can photograph year round. Even in Middle Tennessee, when we get down in the 30s or even colder, you can, there's florists that are, and we'll talk about that a little later. But florists and your local Kroger or Publix, you have a great source for the flowers, and with the proper setup in your home, you can get some great images in the middle of January. So there's a lot of opportunities in flower photography. If you're just getting started or wanting to enhance the photography for flowers, hopefully I'll share some few tips with you this evening that'll maybe spark some creativity. It might remind you of something that you used to do that gave you great results, and you'll start doing it again. So with that in mind, I'm going to, we'll go ahead and start the screen and make sure we get this thing going. Okay.
Gale, one thing I forgot to mention before we got started too was if y'all didn't see it in the chat already, if you have questions, feel free to use the chat window and I will monitor that throughout the session. But don't hesitate to ask questions directly to Gale as well too. So whichever you feel comfortable with, we've got you covered.
Yeah, appreciate you saying that. Anytime you have a question, don't feel like you're going to be interrupting me. You may actually be giving me a break to get a drink of water. so don't hesitate, or you can put it in the chat. And I'm going to rely on Jeremy to read the chat comments or questions. So let's go ahead and get ourselves started. First of all, light is very important in flower photography, as it is in all types of photography. But light has a tremendous influence on the end result of what you're shooting, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that. contrary to popular belief, and this would be really for the very beginner. If you've been shooting for a while, you have already experienced the results of this. But if you're shooting flowers in direct sunlight, you're probably not going to get the best result that you would be hoping for. Bright sunlight actually desaturates the colors. It doesn't make them brighter. The simple fact that you've got that bright sun on those colors, it actually diminishes the impact or the pop that you would get. So that's one reason why if at all possible, I will avoid direct sunlight when I'm photographing flowers. Direct sunlight also, as with any type of photography, it can create some unwanted shadows. Now, you would want some kind of depth to the flower, and you get that between highlights and the dark areas. But we're talking about creating deep shadows that you may not want, and so direct sunlight can be an enemy when photographing. Also, direct sunlight, you run the risk of really blowing out the highlights of the bright areas of the flower. So, I mean, if you're shooting or photographing a white flower, and it's a beautiful, maybe it's a white tulip, and you've got direct sunlight on that, you run the risk of losing all the detail that exists in the petals of the flower. So again, you want to avoid that. And if you have any kind of a busy or semi-distracting background, the direct sunlight will actually emphasize that or exaggerate that background that you're probably trying to avoid. So if at all possible, we want to keep the direct sun off of the flower. And there's some ways to do that. Here's some examples of what flowers can look like in direct sun. Now this, and I've got all kinds of flowers that were photographed in direct sun because of where I was at, the time of the day, the limited time of day, and early on I was photographing anything and everything that had color. And then it was only after spending a little bit more time in this type of photography did I realize I was really losing out. I had an opportunity to be on the west coast of Oregon several years ago, and driving past a huge nursery, and so we pulled in. It had to be maybe 2 acres of big variety of flowers, and everything was in bloom. But it was about 11 o'clock in the morning, bright sunshine, which you think, well, in Oregon, did you ever see bright sunshine? Well, we did. In fact, for most of the trip, we had bright sunshine. But this is an example of what you get with direct sunlight on a flower. And yeah, there's ways around that, which I'll show you here in just a moment. Again, here's another example. Almost losing detail in the flower here because of the direct sun. So you can see what the impact has. And really you've got some specular highlights in the background, which may be, you may look at that as being, okay, or even appealing, or it could be considered a distraction, and that's really your call. And again, this is just another example of everything. The colors are just desaturated because of the direct sun. And I'm going to jump ahead a little bit and say, because we're going to talk about this later, but while I'm thinking of it, direct sunlight really will cause your main subject, which hopefully it's obvious what my main subject is here, is that one tulip in the center, but it also tends to blend in with the background. It doesn't stand out like it could if it was not in direct sun. And also, if you'll notice on all of the pictures I do have, because I get asked this a lot, or people will ask, oh, well, what was your settings? So on these, I'm telling you or showing you what my lens focal length was, and shutter speed, and aperture and ISO, for those of you that like to know that kind of information. And again, here's another example. Had that been in the shade, that could really have an impact as far as color. But I did lose that because of the direct sun. So when I'm getting ready to go out and shoot flowers, first of all, I'm looking, which I do every day, I'm looking to see what's the weather. Is it going to be cloudy, semi-cloudy? Is it going to be heavily overcast? Is it going to be raining, which is not always a bad thing? But I look for the days when we don't have that 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock direct sun. I'm going to be looking for something that what we call a diffused. And several ways you can use diffused light. One, again, is on a cloudy day or in open shade. Oftentimes around our house here, we've got some flowers on the west side of the house, on the east side, and on the south side of the house. And obviously early morning, I'm going to be, if I'm going out to shoot, I'm going to be photographing on the west side of the house. So I'm in the shade, or the flowers are in the shade. And then just the opposite of that in late afternoon. Then I've got an opportunity to get shade on the flowers later in the day. And so that's what I look for. I have yet to invest in a diffuser. And if you by chance don't know what that is, I mean, get on BH Photo or Adorama, any of those, and all we're talking about is just a disc, and it may be about a 12, 16 inch, maybe 18-inch round disc that has a cloth that allows some light to go through. So it's not 100% blocked, but it does cut down on the direct light, and reproduces, if you will, kind of an open shade. And someday I'm going to get one of those. It's great if you've got somebody with you that can hold that for you, get it in the right position. Sometimes I may be photographing a flower that's 5 feet away, and my arms aren't that long. Of course, you can get holders or stands to hold those things, but then you're talking about carrying a lot of extra equipment, a lot of gear, and I'm not into that. I like to keep it simple, and something just as simple as standing in between the flower and the direct sunlight. Create your own shade, and again, it's helpful if you've got somebody with you that can get in the right position, because your composition or the angle that you're wanting to shoot that flower may not permit you to be standing, for you to be standing in the shade yourself. Here's some examples in contrast to the pictures I just showed you a moment ago. Here's examples of open shade for this particular flower. And in fact, you can see we've got sunshine on the background, which really, for some reason, normally I wouldn't like this, but this one, I think this one works. I think the bright areas of the background is not distracting. So again, open shade for this one. And again, open shade here. And again, another example. And you'll notice here too, I'm shooting with a lens baby. And I'll talk about my gear at the very end, but that's one of the lenses. I just got this a couple of years ago. And for me, there was a learning curve to the lens baby. It does a great, and lens baby, if you go to their website, they got numerous lenses. And I watched a lot of YouTube videos on the variety of lenses. And this is the one I settled on, and I'm happy with it. But it was a little bit of a challenge in focusing this thing. You got to focus, it's manual only. And what I found is when I was opened up at f1.8, which is the widest aperture, because the nature of this lens, the more you open it up, the softer the focus is. It gives it more like a dreamlike look. And at 1.8, actually, I couldn't find my focus because it was too soft. And so for those of you with lens babies, one of the tips I would give you, if you haven't already discovered it, is I would focus at 5.6, maybe f7, f8, and I would get my manually focus, and then I would open it up to f2 or 1.8 if I wanted to get a really soft picture. So that's a freebie for you. Again, open shade. That's my preferred type of shooting. Excuse me, of shooting flowers. And again, just in open shade. This is just around the house here. I do like backlighting. Now it depends on what the flower is, but backlighting can give you a really unique or interesting look. For example, the white tulips. Late in the afternoon, this was actually in my neighbor's yard, and she's very kind to let me come over and photograph when her flower beds start blooming. But you can just see it's a totally different look when it's backlit. Now you've got to work a little bit to get correct exposure, because with this thing being backlit, it can be a little bit of a challenge when you're shooting in auto. The camera is not quite sure. Oftentimes, the camera is not quite sure exactly what the exposure is that you want. It's trying to guess for you. So exposure compensation dial is something I use quite a bit when I'm shooting something that's backlit, and I tend to focus, or excuse me, expose for spot metering rather than using center weighted or the entire frame for exposure mode. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and stop there. Any questions so far? This might be a good place to pause for questions.
Nothing in the chat at this point.
Okay. Anyone out there want to jump in? Okay. All right. Again, more examples of backlighting. We were talking about tulips a few minutes ago. I just find it just gives a different perspective, a different look to the same flower, whether if you shot it in open shade or an overcast day versus backlighting. Total different looks. So it just depends on what you're looking for. And we're talking about a background check. Flower photography, very much like landscapes photography, backgrounds are very important. And I find that with flowers, for me, it's more challenging to get the right angle, to get the angle of the flower that I'm wanting, and at the same time have a background that is complementary to the flower and not be a distraction. And so I will spend as much time finding my angle on that flower to get the right appealing background. Excuse me. I'm trying to avoid clutter and distracting colors, or by distracting color, something that is really not complementary. I try to avoid where again, if I'm in open shade and the background is in direct sun, I'm usually avoiding anything that has blown out highlights. Again, I gave you an example of one a little bit a few minutes ago, a couple of slides ago, which that one works for me. For some reason, I like that one, but generally I'm trying to avoid that. And I'm shooting flowers at a wide enough aperture that I'm getting a very shallow depth of field. And so with a shallow depth of field, your background, actually the camera becomes more forgiving for the background because it's going to be very blurred out, generally speaking. So that's one advantage of having a wide aperture. And I'm usually shooting as wide as whatever lens I have on the camera, because again, I want a shallow depth of field. Now, some photographers and some classes that I've taken, they will say they only shoot for maximum depth of field on a flower. They want the front edge of the petal on the flower and the back edge on the petal on the flower to, from front to back, all be in focus. And that's their style. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just a creative decision on the photographer's part. I tend to look for that shallow depth of field in most of my pictures. I think I've got one example of where I did a focus stack on a flower. But generally, what you're seeing here is you're seeing very shallow depth of field on the flowers. And again, number one, that's my preferred look for the flower, but it also helps me to eliminate a cluttered background. Now, for example, here's an example of what I consider to be an extremely busy background. The flower I thought was very attractive, but I couldn't position myself. This was actually at Butcher Garden in Vancouver Island, and this was actually at the entrance or the exit if it's at the end of the day. And as we were leaving, this caught my attention, but where it was positioned in a flower bed, it was all the yellow flowers in the background. I couldn't get away from it. I shot it anyway, and it's a good keeper for what you may not want to do. So again, this is an example of where colors don't really work together, in my opinion. Here's another example of a flower that doesn't really stand out because it blends in too much with the yellow in the background. So again, I lost what I think I lost the texture, the structure of the petals. So this shot, I think, because of my selection of composition and the selection of the background, is not a keeper, other than an example of what to avoid. And then again, highlights in the background, the blown out highlights of the flower down in the lower left-hand corner is what I would typically try to avoid. And again, direct sun on the background, very busy. And I like the flower. I thought I had a good angle on it. Excuse me, but I didn't like the background. And with a little bit of Photoshop cloning, I was able to eliminate that. And so that this may not fall into the basics definition of flower photography, but this was a simple process in Photoshop. And so again, it's from here. Obviously, your eye goes everywhere. You look at the flower, but then your eye is going to all of the highlights in the background. now you've just got one subject that gets all the attention. Again, getting a nice soft background. You'll notice that the petal in the front of the flower is sharp. That's in focus, but because of my shallow depth of field, and this is what I shot at f2.8, and so I'm going to get that very shallow depth of field. And again, the advantages of being able to open up wide. And this one is just, I like this picture simply because of the composition. It's simple. It's quiet. I had someone describe that to me the other day. They said, this is just a quiet picture, and rightfully so. Simple background, totally diffused, totally blurred out, and again, just simple. This one, which I think I'll show you here in a few minutes, I've got this one in black and white and hanging on the wall, which I think in black and white actually looks better. Well, we'll talk about those options. Again, with Lens Baby, the particular Lens Baby lens that I have, it creates that soft look. Some folks don't care for that. They'd rather have things in very sharp, in more detail. And a lot of my flowers, as you'll see, is exactly that. But every now and then, when I see something, a flower or a composition that lends itself to something that is excessively soft and dreamy, then that's when I'll put on that particular lens. And this was actually shot at Opryland Hotel. And then for isolating the beauty, and by that, all I'm talking about there is you find that one flower that really gets your attention. It might be the most unblemished flower in the bunch or in the flower bed, or it may have a unique color or a unique shape compared to all of the others, is isolating that. And I show you how simple this is. This was from last year, actually, in our front flower bed next to the garden hose. You can see there. And so this is a pot that my wife had planted, and you look at that and it's like, okay, what do you do with that? Not a lot of beauty. But what got my attention was that particular flower. It was where I was positioned. It was off by itself. And so the result was this. And again, a little bit of adjusting in Lightroom. I just took the black slider in Lightroom and I just slid the black slider over to the left a little bit until I pretty well blacked out the background. But again, you can see, you can find the beauty, these isolated beauties just about anywhere if you just simply look for it. And I enjoy the hunt. That's one of the things I like, whether I'm walking through a botanical garden, whether I'm walking through a city flower bed, maybe around the square, I'm going to look for that one little flower that stands out. And then when I do see something like this, it's like, oh, here we go. And then I can start playing with it. Here's another example. Again, this is at the side of our house. And I like the cone shape of the petals. And I thought, okay, there's got to be something here. And I admit, I probably spent 10 minutes just walking around this thing and looking at it from all angles and thinking, okay, there's got to be something here, something maybe a little bit out of the ordinary, something that will allow me to be maybe a little more creative. And as a result, I got this particular angle, this shot. And again, it just didn't pop up and catch my eye immediately. It did require me to spend a little bit of time uh, looking and in situations like this, if I'm looking and scouting around for around this one flower or flower pot, I'm doing that through my viewfinder or LCD screen. And so I'm looking for that composition. And then once I get something and go, okay, here's what I think I want. What lens is going to give me the look that I'm after? And again, I wanted a somewhat of a soft look. And again, I shot that one, as you can see, at 2.4 aperture. So that open flower in the background was I think maybe like 4 inches away, but totally diffused. And then another area of the flower bed in the on the west side of the house. And just again, I found this one particular flower that got my attention only because of it was hadn't fully developed, and it was not the prettiest flower uh, in the bunch, but it got my attention. So to get a little more technical, where do you focus? Well, again, that depends on the look you're after. Depends on your artistic vision, if you will. This particular flower, uh, I focused right here in the very front, and I tend to do that. Probably 99% of the time, I'm focusing on the front edge of the flower or the petal. If I'm not going to focus stack, which I don't do a lot of focus stacking out for flowers outdoors for obvious reasons. You know, a little bit of breeze, any kind of motion at all will totally throw off the focus stacking. Even if you try to an auto align in Photoshop, there are limitations. So if it's outdoors, rarely do I try to do a focus stack on something as small as some of these flowers. I will do that. I'll bring that flower indoors. I have to sneak past my wife when I cut the flower off and bring it in, and then set it up on the work area and create the backdrops and all of that. But then I can do some focus stacking if I wanted to. I like to put the focus on what I've considered to be the most interesting feature of that particular flower. As you can see right here, that's really what got my attention. And even though I'll show you some other examples of this, but I just applied a texture layer to this flower, and I'll talk about some of the ones that I've used in the past, which I really like this application using textures. I know we've got some folks in the Brentwood group, and if I try to say names, I'm going to miss one. But there are a couple of folks that post regularly on the Brentwood Facebook page and do a fantastic job. They should be teaching this as a totally separate class because they are experts at it. But this again, applying a texture gives you a whole different look. But you can see where my focus point was here. And again, the detail, what I really was really after. And you can see how shallow the depth of field is here at 2.4. And this was with the macro lens. So, and you may have a question about, well, what's the advantage of the macro lens? Well, the advantage, it allows you to get your lens, generally speaking, closer to the subject, and still be able to obtain focus. You know, every lens you have, there's a minimum distance between the front of the glass and the subject. Some, like a big telephoto lens, 100 to 400 lens, it might be like 30 inches is as close as you can get. Some lenses, maybe you can get within 10 inches. But any closer than that, you can't get any focus. It's too close. But the macro allows you to really get in close. And there are extension tubes that will allow you to get even closer to your subject. Back in my Canon days, I had a couple of extensions, and what I like about the extension tubes, there's no glass in it. So you're not degrading the quality of the picture, but it just allows you to really, really dial in to something close. And again, what is most interesting to me, that's where I'm putting my focus point. Now, this particular flower, you can see most of this is definitely out of focus. The only thing that is in focus is this part of the stem. And that was by choice. I could have put that focus point on the front edge of that forward petal, and it probably could have been an interesting shot. But for me, the stem, this part of the stem really got my attention. And again, I think I mentioned that I usually focus on the front edge of the flower. Occasionally, I'll focus on the back. And here's an example of that. And I don't like that half as much as I like this one. But again, that's just my style, my preference. And this one, if I shot this indoors, I probably would have focus stacked this one just so I would have that as an option to print. But I really like where my focus is on this one. I like the softness of everything else about the flower. So I'm going to stop there. And again, we'll open it up for any questions.
I've answered a few in the chat, but feel free all to ask Gale if you need some additional clarity on my responses. But knowing Gale pretty well, I feel like I've answered on a lot of things that he would say. So, for example, I know that Gale uses a tripod pretty regularly, and when we're talking about flower photography, it's probably a good idea to use a tripod no matter how steady your hand is, because flowers are gentle, and so little breezes can create just the slightest of movement that you may not even necessarily notice when you're taking the picture. So it would just help ensure that you're going to have everything in focus in the way that you would want for it to be done. Gale, are there, I know that you use Photoshop a lot. Are there any other apps that you know that maybe somebody in our group has used, or maybe you're just familiar with, that would help in maybe like adding some of those textures? I mentioned Snapseed as one, I think would do that, but maybe you have some others that you know of.
Yeah, actually, I've got a slide at the end, but I'll go ahead and address that. I use Topaz Studio as when I'm doing the flower photography. If I want to give it more of a painterly look, or add maybe a little more artistic, then Topaz Studio is my go-to software. And I think I've mentioned this in a previous class or classes, in that Topaz Studio comes with, I couldn't even begin to count how many presets that they've already created. And I like some of the presets, but I modify them. I've never used a preset just right out of the package. I usually, for example, one of the presets I use a lot to give it a painterly look, If they take it right out of the software, they have everything at 100%. And I actually dial back on on that application or the look that particular preset would give. I usually dial it back to about 35 or 40%. And again, that's just my choice. And then once I create or modify a preset, then as with most softwares where you can adjust presets, I'll save it and give it a name. And then when I decide to go back in again, and I think that preset would be the one I would want to use, I've already created my version of that preset, and then I may even tweak that one a little bit depending on what the subject is. But Topaz Studio is one. Of course, I use Lightroom for my imports and for my basic adjustments. I do Photoshop primarily for cloning, or do a auto align if I am going to do some layering and maybe adding textures. And I'll give you a couple of companies of the textures or filters that I use. I know I've got that on a slide coming up. And in fact, I think I've got those on that other slide. So we'll hold off on that. But I do want to make a point about the tripod, and I appreciate you bringing that up. I'm using it. Well, those of you who've been in previous classes, you know, I've said over and over that probably 90% of the time, 95% of the time, I'm on a tripod for landscapes and still lifes. And the same thing applies to the flowers. I don't do well hand holding, and partly because of my maturity level. And so I do have to rely on the tripod. And now I've got a camera now that has in the body stabilization, and it's good for up to 6 stops of stabilization. So it works really, really good. However, even with that stabilization, nothing prevents me from swaying forward and backward slightly, particularly if I'm shooting a flower and I'm shooting it at a low angle, such as those things that are in our flower bed around the house. None of those are more than maybe 2 feet, 3 feet at the most above ground level. So I'm kneeling, or in some cases I'm plopping down and getting comfortable, and then I'm using that tripod. Well, even then, nothing keeps me from swaying back and forth just from breathing. And if I'm using an extremely shallow depth of field, such as one of my lenses is 1.8, that's pretty unforgiving. And all I've got to do is move backward or forward just barely, and I've lost my focus point. So that's why I rely on the tripod. So Jeremy, I'm glad that you reminded me of the importance of that. Any other questions that came up, or something I may have missed?
Nothing else in the chat.
Okay. Obviously, we've been talking about the focus point. Where is it? What's the feature of the flower? That's probably where you want to have your focus. But bottom line is, you've got to have everything. You've got to have something in focus. Handheld, the camera I had that did not have image stabilization, and I had a lens on that did not have image stabilization. And bright sunshine, that was a big no-no. But again, this was at the one place, and I was only going to be there 15, 20 minutes, and I had to take advantage of it. But here's an example. If your picture's not sharp, if it's not in focus, it doesn't matter how beautiful that flower looks when you're seeing it. It's not going to look good coming out on your computer or on social media. So critical that you obtain focus. Again, another example. This could have been an interesting picture, but but again, I missed my focus point. And again, another example, I missed my focus point and extreme. I don't even know why I took this picture, other than for this class on on how bad it can get. And I got to tell you, I mean, I'm showing you flower pictures that some of these I think are acceptable, but for every one of those, I can show you probably 40 or 50 that are not, for whatever reason. So I don't shoot 20 pictures of flowers around the house or at a garden and come home with 20 or 30 great pictures. Maybe you can do that. If so, congratulations. I don't have that kind of track record. I don't expect I ever will. When shooting outdoors, and it doesn't have to be extremely windy. I mean, any breeze, slight breeze. I know this morning I was watching out of my office window and I was looking at some of the flowers, and up until about 7:10, 7:15 this morning, there was no wind whatsoever. That would have been an ideal time. It still would have been open shade, and it would have been a great time to photograph those flowers. At about 7:20, the breeze came in, and that would have created a challenge. So what do you do when it's windy and you can't control that? Well, one is you get a friend to stand to block the wind if you can. And I know some people use a board, maybe a diffuser, a large one to block the wind. But generally speaking, you just have to raise your shutter speed to try to capture or freeze that action. So I will increase my shutter speed if I have to. I will, if I've got flowers that are moving, particularly if they're moving forward or backward. In other words, they're blowing toward me and then blowing away from me. Then I will change my focus mode to continuous. And I will keep my focus point, which I always use single focus, a single focus point, and I will keep that on the flower. Well, as long as I'm in continuous, or for Canon users, it's AI servo. As long as you've got that focus point on that flower, whether it's moving forward or backward, changing distances from the camera, it'll stay in focus. So that's if I've got any wind or breeze, I'll just switch over to a continuous or AI servo. And at the same time, I'll put the camera in burst mode. So I hit that shutter button. I may get in a short burst, I may get 5 or 6 shots of that flower, and by doing that, I feel like I'm increasing my chances of getting that flower in focus, even if it's moving because of the wind. And and I'll just do some short bursts, and again, I'll get maybe 5, 6, 7 shots in that burst, and then I'll take a look and see if I've got anything, and if not, we'd try it again. And along with trying to block the wind, and there's some techniques out there that, but for me, it takes additional equipment. I'm not into that. And then the other is just being patient. Sometimes if you've got a mild breeze, occasionally that will actually, the breeze will stop momentarily. And if you've got a fast enough shutter speed and that movement of that flower slows down enough, then you can capture it and you're going to get a sharp image. So again, you got to deal with the elements. And of course, shooting inside of a greenhouse, that makes life easy. Shooting indoors makes it easy. And then again, let's talk about depth of field. Depth of field is created by your distance to the subject and the aperture that you're using. Both of those in combination. For example, the closer you get to the subject, the shallower depth of field you're going to have. You could be shooting at f/16, excuse me, and even shooting at f/16, if you get, as you get closer and closer to that flower, you're seeing a shallower and shallower depth of field, regardless of the aperture you're using. You could shut it all the way down to f/22, and you get to that minimum focus distance, you've got a shallow depth of field. Contrary, if you can be at f/2 and be back far enough away, and you could get the entire flower in focus, even at f/2, if you're far enough back. So again, distance will determine your depth of field. And obviously aperture is the other main factor. You're shooting at 3.5, 4.5, you're going to have a shallower depth of field than you would if you were shooting at f/11. And again, for flowers, I'm wanting a blurred background. I don't want any unnecessary distractions, and so I'm going to shoot wide open. I've got a couple of prime lenses that are f/2, and when I shoot those, I mean, it talk about shallow. I got a very shallow depth of field. But I also shot recently, and I'll just throw this out here. I shot a sports team just the other day, and it had to be in a gymnasium because it was raining out, and I didn't want to shoot in the gym. I didn't take my strobes with me. I thought we were going to be able to shoot outdoors, but it started raining. But I had my f/2 lens, and I was shooting the entire team, and I think it was 11 players on there. I had 2 rows. And at f/2, you might think, okay, if I focus on the person on the front row, the person on the back row is going to be slightly out of focus. But I had to be back far enough to get the entire team in the picture. And I was far enough back that everything, both rows were tack sharp. So again, just another example of distance to the subject has a big bearing on the depth of field that you can create. Again, here's with my macro lens, and I wish I could tell you how close I was to it. I don't remember, but with the macro lens, I was probably maybe 8 inches away from this flower. And I shot it at 5.6, and because I wanted the center of the flower to be in focus along with the water drops. Water drops, some of them on the petals are very sharp, some are not as sharp, but again, distance had a lot to do with the depth of field. Same thing here. Again, I shot it at 5.6. And I know I was about, this one I remember, this was in Cades Cove. And I remember laying down on my stomach and shooting in this field that had all of these, all the green foliage. And again, the water drops on that front leaf is really the subject. That's tack sharp. And you can see in the upper left corner, the depth of field was shallow enough, not because of aperture, but because of how close I was to it, and it was already out of focus. And again, this is at 98 millimeter. I was as close to the to this tulip as I could with that particular lens, because I needed the background blurred, and that background actually is a tree trunk. And again, here's another example of, we had a picture similar to this earlier on in direct sunlight and how it desaturated the colors in it, and the front flower, the subject, tend to blend in with the background. Here, it's not blending in with the background. It's standing out. And again, shooting at 2.8 and getting in as close as I could, created an extremely shallow depth of field. Same thing here. Focus point was on the front pedals. And then again, this is what I like about the lens baby. They don't sponsor me, but I love this lens. And but it gives me that very soft look, which I liked for this particular picture, and very, very shallow depth of field. This is a dandelion out in the field, and this one I had to do a little searching. I had to scout around a little bit to be able to isolate just one of the purple buds. This field was probably had thousands all around, but I was able to finally single one out and have a soft green background. And again, very shallow depth of field. If you want the entire flower to be sharp, again, just to reiterate, I've already said it, just move back from the subject and decrease your aperture. Maybe go to f8, maybe go to f11 or 16, and then focus stack. I've never had any luck with focus stacking flowers outdoors, simply because, well, number one, I've never done it when there was no breeze. And so I've never done well with that. All my focus stacking usually is indoors with flowers. This is an example of one that was outdoors, zero. This was a hot, humid day, and there was zero breeze. I was in a little holler going back in the hills, and no wind, and did a focus stack, and you'll see here, as you can see, this one was 60 frames to shoot that. That's a lot of blending. When I do focus stacking, I use Helicon Focus. And I probably should have listed that as one of my softwares, but I don't use it a lot because I don't do a lot of focus stacking for flowers. But Helicon, Helicon, Helicon Focus. I think it does a much, much better job than Photoshop with regard to focus stacking. It's very, very easy, very simple. These 60 frames, and I'm just guessing now because I don't remember, because this has been a while, but I'm going to guess these 60 frames probably took maybe about a minute, maybe a minute and a half for it to get rendered. And oops, I apologize for that.
That's an Amber Alert.
Yeah. Well, okay. We'll wrap things up here quick so I can go to my shelter. Keeping it clean. And you've got to kind of pay attention to the flower here, but I always look for ones that have very little blemish and or dirty spots. And you can see on the petals here, I did a little cleanup. And again, I'll just show you what I did. And I just think it makes a difference. Now, some people say, well, that's cheating. It all depends on what you want to call cheating. I just think it makes the picture look better. There's actually a stem in the background toward the left that I also removed. And again, that's one of my Photoshop uses. Again, this one here, cleaning it up just a little bit, getting rid of some of the blemishes. And again, I think it just makes it a little bit cleaner. And again, on this one, I just darkened the background. And then black and white, we'll kind of wrap things up here. This is that flower I showed earlier. And I I think it's better in black and white than the original color. Another black and white. And if I'm doing landscape, I oftentimes will be thinking of black and white. I shoot in color. I don't shoot in monochrome. I do want the option of color, and then I'll take it in and convert it. I'll make a copy of the image, and then I'll use black and white, play with that to see. But oftentimes when I'm looking at my composition and subject, I try to think, okay, what would this look like in black and white? Would it be even, would black and white do anything for it? And a lot of times the answer is no. And, it just stays in color. And then sometimes when I'm looking at sun, I go, you know what, that's going to look good black and white. Again, I shoot it in color and then I'll convert it. And this particular flower, when I shot that, I thought, okay, that could just the shape of the flower, the shape of the petals. This could be a black and white. And I don't even have the color version to show you, but this looks 100 times better than the color version. Again, converting this one to black and white. So I just say that to say, don't ignore the possibilities when using black and white. Be thinking about, and sometimes you can just surprise yourself when you, again, if I'm in Lightroom, I'll just simply go over into the black and white filters, play around with them, and see what it would look like. I used to use Nick, I think it was Nick Silver Effects. I think it was Silver Effects. I think that's what it was. I used to use that, and now Lightroom is I think does a great job. And again, black and white. Shooting through just simply means find that flower, the subject, and place other flowers in front of it, included in the composition, and then have a shallow depth of field to where it's not a competing subject. But that's what I did here. I just positioned myself between the same wildflowers, and then went with a shallow depth of field. It's kind of like framing, which we talked about in one of the classes. Again, shooting through, having the blurred foreground, and then rule of threes. And then I know we're a couple minutes over. I apologize for that, but rule of threes, not the rule of thirds, but rule of threes, odd numbers. And the rule of threes here, all these pictures just have three, I think they all have three flowers rather than just a single. I think this would be, I actually shot this at a different location, just a few feet away, and I got 4 flowers in there. 3 looked so much better. Just shows a little bit of drama, if you will, for lack of a better term, shooting 3. And this one's kind of like I got one that's floating away. And again, it's between, okay, here's the 3, but actually this is, for me, I think just the 2 actually works better. And then grouping the flowers. I don't do a lot of that. I usually try to single out the flowers. This was at Cheekwood. This was actually in Vancouver Island. Big flower bed. I could not find a single flower. So I just went ahead and shot the length of the flower bed and got 3 different colors in it. I think it turned out pretty well. And instead of trying to find one tulip, shot all of them. Again, this was at Cheekwood a couple of years ago. Shooting year round. That's the beauty of flowers. Find natural light, shoot near a window, make sure you adjust for the white balance. and then select your background. Jim Zuckerman, I know he just presented recently. Jim taught me that to use black velvet as a background rather than black foam board. Black velvet, the material of velvet absorbs the light, so you don't get any reflection. So black velvet really works well. I've go to a florist and say, hey, I want to photograph a rose. The florist is going to give you their best rose. Garden centers, if you ask, I've never been turned down yet. Even with my tripod, I haven't had a garden center turn me down and say I can't photograph. Gaylord is a great place. I've never tried shooting with a tripod in Gaylord. I don't know if you're permitted to do that or not. I never did try it. And some of you may have that experience. I'd appreciate getting your feedback. And then photographing artificial flowers. These are a Gaylord. This was at a garden center here near my home. Again, garden center, and you can see what I did. Again, manipulated the background a little bit. Artificial. Those are artificial flowers and a little vase. That vase and flowers is probably 4 inches tall. That's about it. African violet, getting real close with my macro. This is in the sunroom. Church lobby. I shot this with my iPhone 5. So you don't have to have an expensive camera and lens to get a good picture. And that tells you how old that photo is for it to be a 5. I like patterns and textures, repeating patterns, and then expressing my vision. This is the original shot, and this is what I thought would look better. I think the bud stands out more. And Topaz Studio, again, artistic approach. Give it more of a painterly look. This picture looked good on canvas. And again, the painterly look, Topaz Studio. So I'm a frustrated painter. I tried it in high school, didn't do well, but Topaz helps me create what I wished I could do with a brush. And then Kathleen Clemens, a great flower photographer. She's got quite a few YouTube videos. Check her out. She is really, really good. And she has her own catalog of textures. And this is just one texture out of one of her catalogs. And again, artificial flowers. And not only Kathleen Clemens textures, but I also use fly paper textures. Again, and rather inexpensive, but they've got some really unique, some really nice textures. And all of these have courses on how you do it. You know, so Kathleen Clemens, I think, actually on one of her videos, or if you buy her textures, she actually includes a video on how to do this in Photoshop. My gear, we've talked about it. Again, nothing unique or fancy, and that's kind of it. Kathleen Clemens, and then Mike Motes. He's in Michigan. Again, he's got a lot of YouTube videos. Again, very, very good. So for more in-depth techniques and approaches, check both of them out on YouTube. They've got some really good videos. Mike Motes, I like him because most of his are like 6 minutes, 5 or 6 minutes, 7 minutes. And so he gets right to the point, you know, so there's not a lot of filler with him. Okay. So I've run 10 minutes over. I apologize for that. but we'll open it up for questions. Anything you'd like to ask, anything that I failed to mention.
A couple questions in the chat that I haven't brought up yet. The first one, Scott had asked, and I'm sorry, Scott, if I missed the exact context, but the question was manual or autofocus. And so I know that early on you mentioned manual focus, but do you manual focus all the time, or are there situations where you do go to autofocus?
Yeah, good question. Actually, I use autofocus most of the time. And as with anything, there's always an exception. And my exception is if I'm doing a really a macro shot, a really close up of a flower, maybe just a portion of a flower, where I'm, maybe my lens is I'm looking for maybe 3 or 4 petals out of a flower, or just the center of the flower. And so I'm getting in real tight. And for that, I will do manual because I need to be very, very precise. But if I'm standing back and I'm, 3 feet from the flower and I've zoomed in a little bit, then I'm going to go auto, generally speaking. And again, if I'm on auto, depending on if there's a breeze, I'll be on AI servo or continuous, whatever your camera calls it.
Right. The other one, it just says auto white balance. So I'm assuming that means, adjust white balance. So I'm assuming that maybe that means, are you using the auto white balance, or do you spend some time on setting your white balance for each of these images?
For outdoors, I rarely go to auto white balance. If I'm shooting in open shade, even though I'm in the shade, I'm still going to shoot in daylight, white balance. If it's a cloudy, overcast day, then I'll go to shade or cloudy, whatever your camera calls it, for the white balance. But I don't generally go to auto white balance for what I would consider to be a still life shot like that.
All right, we're caught up in the chat, so feel free to ask your questions directly to Gale, or I'll still continue to watch the chat for anybody that wants to hang out a little bit longer.
So we got a quiet group tonight.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll go ahead and wrap things up. So Gale, as always, thank you for your time and your presentation on tonight on flower photography. I think we'll have plenty of opportunity for people to get out and put into practice what they learned tonight. Just a reminder to everybody that is on this, either live or obviously if you're watching it later via a recording, you'll know that we'll be sending out a link to tonight's session in the next 24 to 48 hours. And that link will include the playlist of all of the previous sessions that Gale has presented, and will also be the same link for all future sessions. So you can use that and catch up at any time, or just go back and replay something that maybe you want to kind of listen to a second time and see what you can get in a second pass. So with that, I will say good evening to everybody, and we're glad that you're here, and we look forward to seeing you again next month.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks, Gale.